Hi, I'm Julie. Happy International Women's Day. So, I just graduated from Turing School of Software and Design on the front-end program. And over the course of 7 months of learning front-end development, one of the most helpful things I found out about was Css Grid. In the first month of learning CSS, I had to code this whole project. And looking at it at first, it really freaked me out. I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to handle this. But I had heard about Css Grid from another classmate, and I started to look into it. So I'm just going to go over some of the basics of Css Grid, how it works, and how to get started with using it. So when starting the project in Css Grid, the first thing to do is to give the container property the rule display is grid. From there, determine how many rows and columns you have. Like for this one, we clearly have 3 columns, 3 rows. Then, based on that, you can also figure out how big you want each one to be. You can use either pixels, rem, or percentages. But an important thing to keep in mind if you use percentages is if you have space in between, that's going to end up counting towards your total percentages, and so you're going to have over 100%. One great thing that Css Grid gives us is fractions. Fractions allow us to split up the container into different fractions, as the name suggests. So instead of having to do 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, 25% to get 100, instead you just do one fraction, one fraction, one fraction, one fraction. Or if you wanted a skinny column on the left and the rest to be a little twice as wide, you do 1 fraction, 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is what we would code usually without Css Grid. We'd have to display flex, we'd have to wrap it, justify the content, have space around, so we have those margins. And then we'd have to define the size of each of the containers. And then you'd have to, when you wanted it on a mobile view, you'd have to redefine the size of all those cards, and then change the flex direction from columns to rows, or from rows to columns. Now, with Css Grid, it gets a little bit easier and a little bit more straightforward. You, as I said before, you display grid, justify content center to get in the center of the page, grid template columns, and define all the columns, define all the rows, give it a gap if you want one, and then for the larger cards, you'll just need to have span and say it spans 2 blocks instead of just 1. Some helpful tools that I found while using Css Grid is Firefox, which I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say in the Google building. But Firefox has great dev tools when it comes to Css Grid. If you go to the element and then it has display grid, it'll show you all the lines and where the page is split up. When I first tried to do Css Grid, I had made each box a different color, and which took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and then I found out about this and I was like, oh my god, really? It's that simple? Other things to keep in mind is Css Grid is still relatively new. So if you're using it with Internet Explorer, you need to add the prefix ms, and then it doesn't work in Opera Mini. But that's about it. Thanks.